process. The host has started broadcasting the meeting on YouTube. Aaron Richmond personal meeting room. Website web content Zoom.us. Your meeting. Finder. Desktop. Dates. Menu window. Show chat record on this computer. Shift command R. Menu record on this computer. Shift command R.
3, 2, 1. Welcome or welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, podcast for blind people, where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community, all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. Kyle Jarrow joins us now, courtesy thereof, by the way, our great buddy Aaron Kolonowski, who will be sitting in the audience right here, by the way. But anyway, I would like to ask you basically the question that I ask anyone else who comes to our show here. I understand that you're doing a ton of great stuff around the world, everything from screenwriting to writing the SpongeBob musical. By the way, for the record, I was not a huge SpongeBob fan growing up, but my favorite character is, of course, Squidward. I'm definitely a pessimist. I am definitely negative pessimism. Love being a pessimist. I can definitely encourage you in life. Pessimism is always the way to go. All right, though.
All right,
So,
good choice.
before you created all that stuff and Sky Pony, you of course, just like anyone else, were born Kyle Jarrow. So, who is Kyle Jarrow anyway? And what experiences did you have in your life that led you up to creating all these great stuff? So, walk through the life story, anything you want to share, and I'm really interested in all of it. So, wherever the conversation goes, go.
All right, cool. Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's very
Always
nice to
welcome.
meet you. Thank you to other Aaron for putting us in touch. And maybe obvious, maybe not. I am seeing, and
That is fine.
grateful that you would welcome me into your podcast.
Of course.
Um, so yeah, what is my life story? I was born in a little town called Ellis Hollow, which is outside of Ithaca, New York. So it's very far upstate New York, the Finger Lakes region, if anyone's ever heard of that. And yeah, grew up there, lived there my entire life until I was 17. And really grew up desperately wanting to live in a city and really like maybe like everybody, most people, you grow up somewhere, you want to go see something else. So to me, growing up in a very rural area, I was just really attracted to the idea of getting away and going to a city. Um, and when I was a kid, I was really into acting, and there was this theater in Ithaca, so like kind of in the town nearby, the bigger town nearby. And I did some plays there as a kid, and I did also some. There's two universities there. There's Ithaca College and Cornell, and I did some student films for Ithaca College students. And I don't know, I was just really into acting. I think my mom thought I was fairly outgoing, and anyway, she was right. I really enjoyed it. But then around puberty, my voice changed, but I still looked so young. Like I really, so I couldn't get cast anymore because I was this kind of weird, like I looked like a kid, but I mean, my voice isn't that deep now, obviously, but I didn't sound like a kid anymore. So suddenly I wasn't getting cast, and I was kind of a bummer. Like I'd gotten to be part of this theater community, and that was when I started to write. It was like a way to kind of still feel like I was part of that community. So I started writing plays, and there was a little play contest in town, and I would enter that. And, it was around then that I started getting the idea like, oh, maybe I could write for a living. Um, and yeah, so that was kind of, I guess, how I started. My mom also is a writer, although she mostly writes what's called middle grade nonfiction. So it's like the kind of books that would be in a school library about science, nature, history, stuff like that. So I kind of knew that writing was a somewhat of a viable career. But anyway, yeah. So I think that's kind of how I got the writing bug, from wanting to be, wanting to act and not being able to do it anymore. Um, and then the funny thing is, I went to college and I started to feel like, oh, writing is crazy. Like I can never make a living doing that. Find something else. Um, and then I graduated from college, and I did a little bit of traveling, and then I moved to New York City. and I moved to New York City on September 10th of 2001. So very bad timing.
Okay, that's worth me interjecting, which I try not to do. That's a whoa, that's a yowza.
Yeah, it was
If
a
oh,
yeah, it was a yowza. So it was wild though. Like I moved there, and then obviously 9/11 happened the next day. And of course, it was just, I mean, it was just a crazy time in New York. I mean, obviously in the world, in the United States, but particularly in New York. And, family members were saying, oh my God, get out of there as fast as you can. But I decided to stay. I just moved there and I decided to stick it out. And there really was, I think, anyone who was in New York at the time can attest to this. There was this real feeling of solidarity among people. Like it was this horrible, traumatic thing that had happened, but we'd all experienced it together and we were sort of coming together to get through. There was something about that that was just really magical, and wonderful, although also incredibly sad. So I stuck it out, but the crazy thing was no one was hiring for like the next 3, 4 months. Work was really hard to come by. Everything was just crazy. Um, so I had come to New York with this plan to not be in the arts and, I don't know, maybe like find a job as a consultant, or I mean, it's like what a lot of people did from where I went to college. But suddenly that just wasn't realistic. And I found myself with a lot of free time and just really having to scramble to make a living. And then a lot of free time when I wasn't getting work. And I started writing again. That was just kind of what I gravitated towards to fill that time. And that was when I started to reconnect with that and feel like, you know what? Like maybe this really should be a career, or I should try to make it a career. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is in this moment of crazy trauma, that was kind of what I turned to a little bit as like the thing that was comforting is writing, both music and scripts, and that kind of made me realize, okay, I really owe it to myself to pursue this. Um, so yeah, and then I did, and it's a long and winding road, which I'm happy to talk about, but it's sort of an interesting. I guess what's interesting to me is that it in two times when something was kind of weird, like I couldn't act anymore because my voice sounded weird and I still looked like a little kid, and then something far weirder and far more tragic, 9/11, of course. Both of those times, writing was the thing that I sort of turned to. Um, I don't know. There was something about that that made me realize, like, okay, I owe it to myself to try. So I did. That's my origin story, I guess.
fascinating, fascinating, and the way you tell it is really endearing. I always get a kick out of that. What is it, Kyle? Can you tell me something about you? All of you acting drama people. Every time puberty hits, they always blame it. Puberty, can't do it. Puberty, every time, 100%. Like,
Well,
okay, no other profession does that. Okay, I'm a teacher. I've never said, hi Kyle, I can't teach today because puberty. Okay. Nobody else says that. Okay. What is it about you actors? Why are they so sensitive about that? Yeah.
well, I mean, but listen, here's the difference. When you're an actor,
Yeah.
like your body, your voice, all these things, like that's what everyone's staring at you. You know what I mean? So if if
Yeah.
suddenly like here, my wife is an actress, and we have two kids, so she was pregnant, obviously, with those kids, and both times it was very difficult for her to get cast because I don't know, like it's hard to cast a pregnant woman as a character who's not meant to be pregnant. It's hard to cast someone who seems like they're awkwardly going through puberty in a role that doesn't seem like they should be awkwardly going through puberty. There's something very exposed where your body needs to fit the character. That I think is the reason behind what you're asking. Although I'll be honest with you, it's actually really traumatic, right? I mean, it's why a lot of actors feel pressure to like get crazy plastic surgery and stuff like that. It's because they're the idea that your body would change and that could, keep you from getting roles is real and really scary. So
Hmm. That's
I have to say
fascinating.
I'm glad that I haven't pursued acting as a profession because I think that's an awful lot of pressure, and I see my wife dealing with it, and I have a lot of respect for her for it, but I also really feel for her having to deal with that.
Yeah, fascinating. No, I definitely get it. It is a very subtle thing, but the roles with acting, you have to fit the character just right.
Yeah.
It can't be 99%. It has to be a just right. On the other hand, and in a similar vein, so I'm 32 years old, so certainly other traumatic things have happened in my life too. Certainly not the things that have happened to you, but the things that have happened to me, what they've led me to is, of course, teaching, and then I got into podcasting because I was always talking and wanted to fill a void in the industry and things like that because I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
shut up. So I think that when these traumatic things happen, one of the things that I try to teach anyone is that, yeah, they happen for a reason because we're supposed to some extent figure out our life's purpose and things like that. So you
Hmm.
are right. You very well might be right. Yeah. How does
I like that.
and really let's break down the ingredients of screenwriting and some of the things that you've done for TV and how it
Sure.
led into like how does all that work though? I really want to learn from you, and what are the ingredients of a screenplay? How does it really work?
You mean like the actual process of actually writing a
Sure,
screenplay?
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I would say there's, gosh, I mean, listen, there are people who would make whole careers out of teaching this. So you're the teacher, not me. I may not explain it super well. I'll just talk about how I think about it. To me, in any script, a screenplay or play script, there's really there's really three big things. One is structure, and I would describe structure as like the flow of the scenes. And um, another way to think about structure is if you were to just like tell the story to somebody in its broadest terms, this happens and this happens and this happens. That's the structure, right? So that's one big element. Another element is the dialogue, which is what are people actually saying? Um, and obviously dialogue, um, I mean, we've all seen movies that have great dialogue, and we've also seen movies that have terrible dialogue, and sometimes that terrible dialogue is in a great structure, and sometimes there's great dialogue in a bad structure. So like both have to be strong independently, and they have to work well together, right? And then I would say that the third thing is a little bit like more abstract, and I think that third element is what is it actually about? Like, what is the bigger thing that you're trying to say or make an audience feel? Like, what is the thing that kind of makes it special? What is the thing that makes, maybe a better way to say it is, what is the thing that makes it exciting for you as the writer? And I think a really good screenplay, you need to have all three of those things. You got to have strong structure, you've got to have strong dialogue, and you've got to have a strong core, a strong sense of why it matters to you. Because if it matters to you, then there's a pretty good shot it might matter to other people, you know? So I guess to me, those are like what I would call the three main tenets of screenwriting. And whenever I take on a project, it's important to me to sort of nail all three of those. And to be really honest with you, the hardest is the third one. A lot of times the hardest is figuring out why it matters to you, because as projects change and they develop and you get notes from movie studios or TV executives or whatever, sometimes it can start really affecting that third thing, that thing that made it matter to you. And you start wondering, well, is this even about what I thought it was about? Um, and so figuring out how to stay true to that and understand why it matters to yourself throughout the entire process, I think it can be very challenging. To me, that's the hardest part. But I also think it's the most important part because it, if a thing doesn't mean a lot to the person who wrote it, I think it's unlikely to resonate with others. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the same similar vein of podcasting, I'll tell anyone if you don't know why you're doing it, then you can't possibly do it. And you have to figure
Yeah.
out the why. And that's so precise and so delicate and so beautiful that if you don't know why, or if someone says, I don't know why I'm doing it, then I tell them, well, then don't do it. Because if you don't know,
Yeah.
because because if you
Yeah.
don't know why, then you shouldn't until you know why.
Yeah.
So what are, before we get to the SpongeBob stuff, so what is an example of a TV show or a screenplay that you've written where you really looking back on it now you truly understand why? Well, something that you've written that's great and that you understand why you did it now. What do you think?
Oh, you mean like something that I didn't understand at the time, but I sort of,
Perhaps,
yeah,
or something that
interesting.
now looking back on it, you realize why you did it, perhaps, or something that you're very proud of that you know why you did it, something like that. Sure. Hmm.
Yeah, sure. No, that's a great question. Gosh, let me think about it for a second. Um, well, it's funny. I did a TV show um, for the CW network, and it was a show called Valor, and it was about the army. Specifically, it was about this woman who's like the first helicopter pilot in this sort of elite helicopter unit. And the reason I did it is because my brother was in the army for quite a while. He was an army ranger, um, and I anyway. What I'll say is I'm very proud of some elements of the show. It was the first TV show I had done. There are other things I feel like I could have done better, if I'm really honest with you. Um, but I think that when I look back at what are the things I could have done better and where are the places that I feel like I kind of went down the wrong road, I feel like the places I went down the wrong road were places where I forgot or I lost track of why I wanted to do the show, the why for me. And the why for me was a couple things. It was about honoring my brother and also getting to spend some time with him, like doing research with him and talking to him. But it was also realizing that, and also it was about telling a story about a woman in the military where there's just not enough of those stories. But the biggest thing for me, the why, was that I realized when my brother joined the service that just a lot, there's some statistic that I can't remember what the number is, but the important part is at this point in American history, the fewest number of Americans know somebody who's in the military than ever before. And so as a result, I think very few Americans feel connected to the military or really understand what the military is. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions as a result of that. And these are people like my brother who are going off doing things that are most of us would never want to even have to consider doing. Um, and to me, it felt like making a show that could allow people to understand the military if they didn't have a personal relationship to it, um, and to understand it in a complicated way, both the things that are incredibly honorable and the things that are incredibly complicated and sometimes very dark about the military. That felt like really an important thing to do. So that was my why. But I do think there were parts in the process where you're getting all these notes and like it's just a big process to make a TV show, as you can imagine. I think there were times that I lost track of that why a little bit. And I think it's those times that the show maybe stumbled, or I stumbled in making the show, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a negative example, I guess. You were kind of asking for a positive example. Maybe I gave you a negative one,
You gave me a good, you
but
gave the right
you get what
answer.
I'm saying. Yeah.
Very interesting. Sure, absolutely, absolutely. You're very hard on yourself, and and I think all of us are, But that's interesting that you noticed all of that of how important it is to understand why we do the things we do. Absolutely. So then from there, where did you get this interest in SpongeBob from? Now, I would have to ask, it's great series. When I was a little boy in the 90s, it hadn't quite taken the helm as much for my brother's generation. But so why SpongeBob? What was your what possessed you there?
Well, so okay, sort of a couple answers. The first is that I'm a little bit older than you.
Sure.
So I'm a little over 10 years older than you. So for me, I didn't grow up with SpongeBob. I don't actually I can't remember exactly when it premiered. I think they
Like
just did their 20.
97, 90, 96, 97, 98, something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
because they just did their. I think they just had their 25th anniversary. So could that be right? Maybe, yeah, maybe like a year or two ago. So that sounds right. Anyway, point being, I didn't grow up with it, but I kind of came to know it in college. It was like that thing that was sort of always on, and I don't know, like we would watch it in college. I think it's just the weird humor, the surrealism just really appealed. So I can't say that I was like a die-hard fan, but I really came to love SpongeBob in college. And then, cut to years later, I had done some plays that I had written in New York and certainly had done some stuff that had slightly surrealist, maybe SpongeBobian humor in them. And
SpongeBobian.
Nickelodeon, yeah, yeah, for
SpongeBobian.
lack of a better term.
Great
So,
new, great new vocab you just invented there. I've never. Cool, you're inventing words. That's good. That's a
ah,
great.
yeah,
That's a great patent. We'll have to get you set up with the legal department for that.
yeah, right.
SpongeBobian. That's a good one.
So anyway, basically what happened was Nickelodeon was interested in developing a stage musical, and they were, I guess, interviewing different writers or reaching out to different writers to see if they might have interest. And because there of some of the things I had written, they were interested in meeting with me. Um, and it was funny because initially I got the call from my agent about it. Would you be interested in meeting on it? And initially I was like, no way, because I thought I loved SpongeBob, but I was so worried about what a cheesy SpongeBob musical would be. Like you can imagine like the big foam suits and it could just be really cheesy, you know? And but my agent was like, "Hey, just take the meeting." So I took the meeting, and it was with an executive from Nickelodeon, and it was with the director who had actually already been hired, which is somewhat rare. Usually in theater, the director is not hired before the writer. That happens more often in film. But it was kind of cool, and she was a director who I really have a lot of respect for, Tina Landau. So I went to the meeting, but I still had all this reticence, even though I was a fan of Tina's work. I just was like, this could be so bad if it's done poorly. And in the course of the meeting, it became clear that they had the same concerns, that they saw that there could be just a really cheesy version of the SpongeBob musical, and that was not the version that they wanted to make. And I left the meeting feeling like, wow, they actually want to like make the cool version of this show. And then I thought to myself, and I was like, well, if I'm a fan and I would like the non crappy version of this to exist in the world, well, maybe I should try to be the one to make that version, especially if my partners on it might be down for that. And so I was really like, okay, I'm going to try to get this job. And I ultimately did get hired for the job. And then after I was hired for the job, I watched every single SpongeBob episode that had ever aired, which I had not before. I'd watched a lot, but I watched every single one. So I just really like immersed myself in all things SpongeBobian, and then just came to love it more. And so when I finally got to writing it, it was like almost in my blood, if that makes sense, in some weird way. So yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So after watching all the episodes and after doing all that, so how did you decide to paint the picture of basically? How did you even figure out in your creative mind and your brilliant mind where, after watching the episodes, then how did you know even where to take the musical? A musical on a stage is totally different, obviously, from a cartoon. So
Yeah.
how do you even like emotionally or even like psychologically translate that to something that could be a musical? And how do you even direct your own thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, it's complicated. They're very different. I mean, there's many differences, right? Obviously, animation, human beings can do very different things. Although there are songs at times in the TV series, it's not really a musical. So then there's that difference. And then there's also the difference that the TV episodes are 11 minutes long.
Oh, they
And when
are?
you're, yeah,
Wow.
they're 11-minute episodes. And usually when they air two, right? But that is like a very short story format compared to a full length musical. There are some movies, some SpongeBob movies, and those,
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, those
Uh-huh.
were interesting to look at because obviously those are longer. So it gave some guidance in terms of how to tell, a SpongeBob story in that larger format. But really, the biggest challenge I felt was how are we going to tell a story that can bring an audience through 2 hours? And it's got to have big stakes because, like at 11 minutes, you can tell a story about SpongeBob and Patrick playing with a box. I mean, there is an episode about that. You just don't need super high stakes to sustain 11 minutes. To sustain 2 hours and people singing their hearts out, like there's got to be a story with big stakes. So the question was, how do you do a story with big stakes, but you also keep the kind of humor and pacing and like zaniness of those 11-minute episodes? And the solution that I came at was coming up with a really high stakes story. In our case, it's like literally the end of the world. They have to stop all of Bikini Bottom from being destroyed. So stakes don't get much higher than that. And then what I wanted to do is be able to intercut between different characters as they're dealing with that threat, because it felt like we could then quickly cut between them in a way that could give us a sense of pace that felt somewhat similar to what the TV show does. So that was kind of how I tried to solve that on a structure level. On a dialogue level, I really wanted to capture the voices of the TV show. And then on the why level, right? That number three thing we were talking about, like why do it? I felt like also a 2 hour musical needs to be able to answer the question of why is this important in a way that an 11-minute episode doesn't. And I also think that when things get, when you do like musical adaptations of stuff or whatever, a lot of times it feels cheesy or craven or just like a corporate move if there isn't a sense of why. If it just feels like, oh, we just did this because we could make more money, right? So I really wanted to figure out that why. And for me, ultimately, the why became a story about how communities react to crisis. Does it, blow us apart? Do we all turn against each other? Or can it bring us together? Which I think is a really big thing that we struggle with in our society, probably every society. And to me, being able to tell a story that could be funny and in the SpongeBob universe, but could also speak to that why, to me, that made it worth doing and helped justify 2 hours of running time. And to be honest, the thing that I'm most proud about in the show is that I think that message comes through, and it seems like people have really connected to that as fans of the musical. And I'm really proud of that because it feels like, okay, we made a show that that has a why in a kind of a profound way. So yeah, that was kind of how I approached it. Again,
Beautiful.
those
Sure.
three boxes have to be checked.
Right, right. But they have to be checked in a very subtle way. Just enough for the audience to notice, but not enough for it to be too noticeable. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you never want to hit people over the head with a moral. That's
Yeah, because then it's
nobody
too
enjoys
because
that.
then it's too obvious what the why is.
Yeah.
You want the why to be there, but up for interpretation too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want people to be able to bring their own experiences to it and read their own lives into it. Absolutely.
So obviously, nothing personal about you. I actually have never seen the musical, obviously. But so is Squidward in it? Did you include
Yeah.
Squidward and Plankton? Plankton was the bad guy that always had the he was like the nemesis of Mr. Krabs. He was always trying to trying to dissing
Yep.
the. So you had to surely you included some of that whole rivalry, right?
Oh yeah,
Obviously.
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, all those core elements are there. And one of the interesting things about the musical is, we did not want to do big foam suits where they look exactly like the characters. You have human actors, they need to be able to move around. The audience needs to see their face. So we really had to reinterpret them and try to figure out, okay, well, what does a human playing Squidward look like? What does a human playing SpongeBob look like? And we have an amazing set and costume designer, David Zinn is his name, and he really reinterpreted these characters. Um, and the costumes were really incredible. And I that was one thing I was very nervous about is whether audience members would sort of accept that the characters didn't look exactly like they looked, on screen. Um, Would they accept that they were still the same characters? And you know what they did? That was not an issue at all. Um, and Yeah, that was one of the really rewarding things about developing it, was realizing like, oh, audiences like to be imaginative. They like to use their imagination, and they're open to messing around with how things look a little bit, as long as it's done in a creative and exciting way. So that was how we tried to approach that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So has your musical played overseas? Was it ever interpreted and translated and dubbed into other languages? That's an interesting
Yeah.
section too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been in a number of countries. I've not seen it in any language other than I went to Brazil when it was in Brazil last year, and I saw it in Portuguese, which was a wild experience. I do not speak Portuguese, um, and yeah, so that was a really special experience. It has been translated into a number of languages and has been done around the world. But I've that's the only foreign language production that I've had the opportunity to see. But one thing that was really interesting about it was Portuguese. Many of the Romance languages, it just takes the things. It's a little bit longer to say most things than it is in English. It's just it tends to take more syllables to say the same thing than in English. So as a result, the show, like, lines were longer. And particularly for comedy, there's like a rhythm of language, and you sort of, I don't know, you get used to a certain rhythm, and I know what rhythm I wrote the lines in, and the rhythm was totally different in Portuguese. But that is what Portuguese speakers are used to, and so the jokes worked. I mean, people laughed. Um, Even though to me the rhythm sounded awkward, and like the lines were too long to be funny, that totally worked for their audience. So that was a really interesting experience to have, and I hope I get to go see some other foreign language productions, because it was
Yeah,
really a
that's
wild and very cool experience.
without doubt. Yeah, I mean, I'm a French speaker, so you're definitely right. You know, things are said very differently, and the thoughts. The other thing too that's interesting is thoughts are conveyed differently. That's the
Mm,
trick. Not only is it different lengths of time need to be used to say the same lines that you write, but then again, not every line translates to how a native speaker of that language would say that idea. That's another very specific and very tricky thing too. That I a
yeah,
lot that's a
yeah.
bigger problem with movies, though, that movies have this problem with knowing, well, how do you what would someone in
Mm.
that culture truly say? Yeah,
Well,
well, good.
it's
Yeah.
interesting because one thing that happens when they translate the SpongeBob musical, or really anything, is I get what is called a back translation to approve. And so essentially what that means is that somebody has translated, we'll take the Portuguese example, somebody translated my English script into Portuguese, and then somebody else translated it back into English. Um, and they did a very literal translation. So then it comes back to me, and there are wordings and expressions and ideas that are different. But I'm reading them in English, right?
Sure,
And then I
understood.
get to
Yes.
say that's okay or that's not. And sometimes there are things that sound very weird and awkward to me, and I have to ask about it. And the answer is, oh yeah, that's like a very Portuguese way to say it, like trust us. And I kind of have to trust, because I don't live in that culture. I don't speak that language. Um, anyway, to your point, translation, I think, is really quite an art. And the people who do translations and do them well, it's an amazing skill, because you have to really understand two languages incredibly well, and you have to understand um, some very subtle things within both of those languages in order to do that job well. So I have a lot of respect for people who do that.
So good. And then I've also heard about you're also a musician and you also created a group, Sky Pony, right? What can you tell us about that? What's the
That
origin of
is
that?
that is true. Yeah, I've always played music. I write songs as well. I've Over the years I've had a number of different bands. But the one that I've had most recently is this band called Sky Pony, and actually my wife is the lead singer. I write the songs, or most of the songs, and then there's 8 people in the band total. It's a big band. Um, and it really came out of, um, when I met my wife before we were married, she's an actress, but also a great singer. And we were just like really interested in finding something that we could do together artistically. And she had always been interested in singing pop music but had sort of like no one ever thought of her that way for roles because she usually got these roles where she had this very sort of almost operatic singing style. So I was kind of like, why don't we start a band, and you can show people, prove to people that you can sing that way. So we did, and we recruited a bunch of friends that we knew from different places to join us. Uh, and that was back in like 2013. So I would say that the heyday of the band was probably like the mid 2010s. Um, and we released a record, we released a bunch of EPs, we really played out a lot, mostly in New York, but some other places too. And it was just really fun. And now we're sort of on like a bit of a hiatus. We actually did just play a show in New York a couple of months ago. We've released new music this year. So we a couple singles. So we keep doing it. But it's not as full on as it used to be. But if anyone is interested in checking it out, www.sky-pony.com. You can check out our music. There's a bunch of stuff you can listen to, download for free. Um, yeah, I love making music, and I will say um, it's a wonderful kind of counterbalance to writing scripts because it just takes so long to get a play up. It takes so long to get a movie made, to get a TV show made. And there's something about being a band where like I could write a song, we can go into band practice like a day later, we can learn the song, make some changes, and then we can play it at a show that weekend. There's just something really fast about that is just really nice when some of the other work takes so long, if that makes sense.
It does. How long does it take to produce, let's say, a TV show, film, musical, generally speaking, although you can't
Well, yeah.
generalize?
I mean, it really can vary, obviously. I would say most musicals, it's between 5 and 10 years from like the first moment of starting to write it until it gets produced. I mean, I think that's probably pretty accurate. Musicals just tend to take a really long time, stage musicals. Um, Movies, also can take years and years to get made. I mean, I have a movie script that I wrote, um, gosh, almost 10 years ago. And now we're trying to, we're getting some traction on maybe setting it up, hopefully knock on wood. But it's taken that long. But there's also movies where it's on a much faster track and that doesn't happen. TV tends to be a little bit faster. Um, but I think that's actually becoming less true in the sense that the TV and film businesses used to be very different and are actually becoming a little bit more similar in some ways. And the result of that is that it sort of has slowed down the process of a TV show getting made. There's some positives to that, I think. I think often like it's better quality if you can take more time to develop something. But it also can be really rough because there used to be something really nice about TV where, you could pitch something, you would sell it, you'd have to write it in a couple months, then you get a yes or no answer. There was something about that that was kind of cool. And that's become less true. Um, so yeah. So the answer is it takes a long time to kind of get any of these things from conception to production. Um, and even production can take forever. Like I worked on Star Trek Discovery for a couple of seasons, and this last season, which was the final season of the show, we finished shooting a year ago, and it over a year ago actually, and it just came out last month. Like it took that long to get it finished, and that's because there's a ton of VFX in that show. There was also the writers and actors strike last year, but that gives you a sense. Like even from finishing shooting, it took a year for it to get to audiences. So these things really can take a long time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you aren't doing all this other fascinating things, what's your most interesting hobby that nobody would ever guess you do?
Wow, what a great question. Well, to be super honest with you, I don't have a ton of time for hobbies because
Understandable.
I have two young kids, and
Sure.
writing can be fairly full on. So like when I have that free time, I do try to spend it being a dad, you know?
A great answer.
Um, but one thing I do really like to do is I'm a runner, and I really enjoy running. I run half marathons, and also just run for me. So that's, I guess, my obviously that's exercise, but it's a bit of a hobby as well. And I will say, I often have like really great writing ideas when I'm running. There's something about just like your body's moving and like um, I don't know, it just creates this space where sometimes your brain can kind of like wander in a kind of a cool way. Um, but I guess I just admitted something, which is that I'm always kind of working because even when I'm running, I'm working. So I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I probably should have more hobbies, to be honest. But
Probably not. Sounds like you're busy enough
yeah,
with the
maybe
success
when my
with the
kids
success
are
you
like
have.
out of the house and, you know, I'll
Yeah.
tell you, you know what it is, honestly, and I think a lot of people in the arts, this is their experience. I had to have a day job for a really long time, right? Like I wasn't able to support myself as a writer um, for a decent chunk of years while I was kind of kind of working my career up. And so in that time, writing was really the hobby, right? Like I would work these day jobs and then writing or making music became the hobby. And so then this weird thing happens when suddenly that hobby can become the way you make a living. And it was sort of like, well, I don't have any other hobbies. Like I spent so long, devoting my free time to that. I don't know. So it's interesting. I feel like as a result, maybe I'm a little bit hobby poor. But I think that's true of a lot of people in the arts because it's something that was for years a hobby became their job. I'll tell you that the negative side of that is it becomes very easy to allow it to take over your entire life because it is a
Yeah.
hobby and it is a thing you love. And so suddenly you can be like, well, what I can do it like all the time. But that's actually not healthy, right? Because doing any one thing all the time, you can really wear yourself out. So that was a lesson I have definitely had to keep learning at different points in my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of success and a lot to learn. And there's a lot of wisdom in all that. So that's extremely interesting. I'm sure though
Thanks.
that, yes, go ahead.
No, I said thanks. That's all.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that you certainly have questions about who this Aaron Richmond guy is. Um, and I'm sure I forget. Were you specifically interviewed by Aaron Kalinowski, or did he just contact both of us at the same time?
No. Aaron did interview me for his
Okay.
podcast. I think
Okay.
maybe it may be like two or 3 years ago now. And then put us in touch.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I'm happy to talk to anyone who's interested,
Well, that's great.
I find what you do really inspiring. I mean, I think what's the why, right? Like you have a why. Like you saw a space in the podcast
Sure.
environment that needed to be filled. I don't know.
Right.
I just think it's really cool.
Well,
I am very curious about you. I know this episode's I guess not about you, but
on
um,
purpose, I love turning the table in both directions. I'm a pretty I have a huge persona if I say so. I'm a bit of a character. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. I was
yeah,
sitting doing teaching work during the pandemic, working from home like everybody does. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts around the blindness community. The problem was that those podcasts were not open to my opinions. So I wanted to create a space where anyone, whether they're blind or not, like you, either way, can come up to my microphone and share their knowledge and just have a great and positive conversation. And
yeah,
that was the void, is that we need to create an environment where people are comfortable having conversations, because these are the types of interactions that will move us forward as people. And this is the type of thing that we need for sure. But I found
Hmm.
out that over time, the more episodes I record, the more I enjoy it. It's almost like a medicine for me, just like I'm sure
Huh.
writing has helped you, feel better. I feel better about it. So I guess, Kyle, the trick is, if you feel better when you produce a TV show or a musical or a film, if it helps you to have a better day, then it's what you're supposed to do. But blind people in particular really need to have conversations, just like all of us do, and we need to find ways of having open conversations. And there is, a lot of podcasts that are not, just in my opinion, just not as flexible perhaps as I would be when it
Hmm.
comes to just approaching people and having the comfort
Interesting.
of just talking, just having a conversation. You'd be surprised. I've gotten so many complaints. You'd be shocked.
Wow.
Oh yeah, podcasts get so much negativity. But
Hmm.
then we also have great conversations like you, and that's what pushes us forward as an industry. I always like to say, so I'm sure you can ask me a question to really make me sweat, to get under my skin. What do you really want to know?
Okay.
I'm
I,
listening.
I do have a question for you, and
Absolutely,
so I'll ask you this, and then I have to go in a little bit, as
absolutely.
you know. So here's a question for you. As somebody who makes TV and theater and movies, um, how how would you like me and those industries to, what would you like us to do differently, if anything, for the blind community? Either to be more welcoming or more
Mhm.
inclusive, or
Mhm.
like I will be honest that I really don't think a lot as I write about what blind audience members' experiences would be, because it's not my experience, right?
Sure,
And so to
absolutely.
hear about how I could do better and we could
Mhm.
do better, or more, maybe better is a loaded word, more effective. I don't know. I would actually love to hear anything you think about that, because it's something that I could actually bring with me
Mhm.
forward into the work that I do. Yeah,
Yeah.
would just be really interested to hear your
One,
thoughts on that.
well, loaded question, and here's a very direct answer.
Yeah.
You need to and should and may want to contact other blind actors. I'm not an actor. The better question would be, that would be a section of the industry that you should talk to. What I think, my private opinion,
Yeah,
is that
as
the
an
sure.
audience member.
I
Yeah.
think, and there was, and now I know to be careful about this. There was a program on CW. I'm not going to say what it was. You know what it was. There was a
Oh, I
program on
do know what it
CW.
was.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. I know you know what it was. There was a program where a blind person was incorporated, yet, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many, not in an appropriate, or um not in the very best way that
Yeah.
they could have been. And you remember that stirred things up around New York City at the time when that happened, whatever that was. We both know what it was.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so I think, I mean, is the answer to only hire blind actors? No, of course not. The answer is to hire the best actor, whether they're blind or not. But the trick here is to portray people accurately. You know, like you were saying before, if you're going through puberty and are self-conscious, well, play a character that's going through puberty and
Right,
is
right, right,
self-conscious.
right.
So, but easier said than done, right? So how do you get the imagery just right? The answer is, I think, that people like you, who are in this position, in a decision-making position, need to try to talk to more blind actors, not blind podcasters, but more blind actors, who would be able to give you professional insight on what needs to be done. I think we need more blind podcasters, more blind actors, and I do think that generally, if the roles are written in an appropriate way, I think that blind people on stage or in theater is great if it's done the right way. So that's kind of the answer. That's what I would like to see. More reality is what I would like to
Yeah.
see. But
Can I
you
ask
could
what
ask
can
you
I
could
oh
ask
sorry.
1,001 people that, and they would give you a completely different answer. Yes, go ahead.
Well, my sidebar question, that's a great, wonderful answer, and really resonates. The other question I have, sort of sidebar on that, is as an audience member,
Mhm.
in term, like, just as somebody who is receiving the entertainment, do you feel like there are things that writers could do to make the entertainment more accessible. And I'm not talking about
Hmm.
blind characters necessarily, or blind stories. I'm talking about like whatever, any
Absolutely.
story.
Absolutely.
Are there things that drive you crazy? There's of course like accessibility stuff that like is being done on the back end by like broadcasters. Like I'm not involved in that. But I mean,
Hmm.
like in the writing, are there certain things that happen in stories where you're like, wow, that is really not welcoming for a blind audience member? Does that question kind of make sense?
It completely does. The answer is this, that I have, as you can tell, I have a pretty twisted sense of humor, right? So nothing on Aaron's opinion is going to be politically correct, and I'm not a politically correct person. And don't try to convert me because it just ain't happening. But I can tell
Okay.
you the point here is all this, that for me, I got to have a lot of great dialogue, a lot of great jokes, a lot of seriousness, but I also have to have elements of horror, elements of thriller. I love a great thriller. So for me, the story has to be serious, entertaining, silly jokes, twisted sense of humor, some of those, some cringy stuff, and then some really, really good acting, and I can tell, a blind person can tell when an actor is good. We feel their lines and what they say
Yeah.
because it's very subtle. It's like the why. When it's there, bingo,
Yeah. Yeah.
just like that. So that's
Yeah.
what you need to figure out how to do. How do you do it? I don't know. If I knew, I would have done it.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool, man. Cool. Absolutely. Well, I just want to say, I know you have to run. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of our heart to yours for joining us. You're forever
Thank you for
welcome.
having me.
You'll soon learn, hopefully, as time goes on, we'll keep talking. You'll learn more about some of the voice acting things that I do on the side, some of the other groups around the world that I could possibly get you in touch with if you would like. But overall, how can someone get in touch with Kyle Jarrow if they want to?
I have a website which is just my name, Kyle Jarrow at kylejarrow.com. So you
Okay.
could go to that website if you want to learn more about me and stuff I've done. And also you can email me through that. So if someone wants to get in touch, that's probably the best way.
Well,
Um,
so wonderful. Well, I think that was a wonderful, really wonderful episode. Really, really
Thanks
glad
for having
having
me.
you. And I hope that you will turn to Aaron's opinion for all of your podcastian needs, moving forward.
SpongeBobian Podcastian. It was really great to chat and
Absolutely was.
stay in touch. Cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. And as we say here at Aaron's Opinion, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow. For those of you surviving on YouTube, thanks so much. Like the video, comment below, tickle the bell notifications, know when we're live next. Again, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
You're
And
welcome.
we'll be in
My
touch
pleasure.
soon. And keep up your great work. You're always welcome on Aaron's Opinion. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.